everyone, welcome to our YouTube channel. I hope you guys are doing well. So in this video, we are going to talk about the major theorists that are related to structuralism. So the major theorist of structuralism. In the previous video, I have already discussed with you what exactly is structuralism. So in the 1960s, this movement started where everyone thought that everything, that means your language, should be used in the most structural manner. And if you do not know how to use it, then you don't have to bother, because without even trying, everything that you utter is always in structure. Right? So we have many theorists like Fernand de Saussure, or it can be Claude Lévi-Strauss, and we have Roland Barthes, Jacques Derrida, who also contributed to structuralism. It was Fernand de Saussure who was a linguist. He started first of all to talk about what? To talk about structuralism. He used to talk about the sign and the signified. Right? And then we had Claude Lévi-Strauss, who was an anthropologist. He also started to use structuralism. And then many more theorists came, and gradually we saw that the theory that was started in linguists and then in anthropology seeped down to the literary world as well. So they started to read the text by using the structural analysis. Let us talk about the major theorists that are there. So first of all, we cannot leave Fernand de Saussure. Fernand de Saussure is also called as the father of the modern linguist. Fernand de Saussure is a foundational figure in the development of the structuralist theory. So he is a monumental figure when it comes to the beginning of structuralist theory. He is a linguist. He was a linguist, I must say, but his contributions affected the literary world. Before Saussure, linguists believed that the mimetic theory of language, that means the words symbolize or reflected things. But after his arrival and his theories, the whole concept of language changed. Saussure's most influential work is the course in general linguistics. The course in general linguistics is the most important work by Saussure. And what's your homework? In comment down below, you have to tell me the date when this work was written. It's a very important work. Often I have seen in the match the following, you see this work, right? So you should remember that it is Saussure who wrote this work, the course in general linguistics, right? So it was posthumously published in 1916, and here comes the answer. But still, I want you to study more about this work by the former students. So what happens? These are basically the lectures he gave in Geneva, and the students of Saussure combined it, and then a book was published. Right? So Saussure's most influential work, the course in general linguistics, was posthumously published. What do you mean by posthumously? After his death, this work was published in 1916 by the former students based on the notes that they have taken from Saussure's lectures in Geneva. Throughout the book, he stated that a linguist can develop a diachronic analysis of a text or a theory of language, but must learn just as much or more about the language or the text as it exists at any moment of time. So he talked about the diachronic analysis of a text and the language or the synchronically, how we can study the language. So in the next video, when we will talk about Fernand de Saussure, we'll talk about the basic concepts that he gave. So we'll talk about diachronic analysis and the synchronic analysis, right? So he talked about that how the language and the text can be studied, whether it is a study that is a gradual process or at a particular time you have to study the language. This is diachronic and synchronic. Language is a system of signs that express the ideas. So what is language according to Saussure? Language is nothing but made up of signs and symbols. It is nothing but a system of signs. A science that studies the life of signs within the society and is a part of the social life and the general psychology. Saussure believed that semiotics is concerned with everything that can be taken as sign, and he called it as semiology. So he is the linguist, and he studied that the language is nothing but a whole system of signs. It is made up of symbols, signs. It's a system in itself. Whenever you use it, there is a symbol, and the symbol is directly same, is proportional to what? A sign and a signifier and a signified, right? So this study of language is called as what? It is called as semiology. Saussure believed that semiotics is concerned with everything that can be taken as a sign, right? It is called as semiology. Then comes Claude Lévi-Strauss. Claude Lévi-Strauss is one of the most important figure whenever you talk about anthropology. Saussure's concept of the linguist studies, or you can say the sign and the signified, were applied by Claude Lévi-Strauss to the study of mythology or in the anthropological world. So Claude Lévi-Strauss applied Saussure's theory to the study of mythology. Just as language has basic structures like phonemes, myths have mythemes that reoccur, the themes of individual myths. So just as every word that is a sign, you can further divide it into smaller units called as phonemes, the myths can also be broken down into smaller units, right? According to him, wherever you go, everything can be broken down into smaller myths, or you can call them as mythemes, and you can see a pattern that can be created. This is what Claude Lévi-Strauss was saying. So there are always individual myths that can be related to the myths that are already present. Similar to the study of language, we can look at the mythemes that interact with the larger structure, right? So each and every word can be broken down into smaller units. Similarly, the myths can also be broken. And just as Saussure was talking about language, we have Claude Lévi-Strauss who said that myths can also be broken, and the entire world has a number of myths, and all of these can be compartmentalized. Further, mythemes like phonemes find their meaning through opposition, and there are oppositions and binaries. One is of course the dominant structure and the other is subdominant culture, right? So for example, you have loving or hating one parents. So because the whole world is in binaries, you tend to see two different ways in which you can understand the world. There is hot, there is cold. So for example, there is a primitive world. So this primitive world is there. This means that a civilized world must be there, right? So there are always binaries that are there in the whole world. And dominant kya hoga? So dominant is the civilized world. And this is always the top bar that we have. You have the civilized world as the top bar, while you have the primitive that is not civilized. So they are the subcategories here. So there are always binaries, and of course, one is the major source and one is the sub-source. Then there are some important works that he has written, the elementary structures of kinship, and of course, Claude Lévi-Strauss is very famous because he talked about kinship. According to him, the whole world is what? There is a kind of kinship and solidarity between everyone. So this is a work that is important that came out in 1949. We have Tres Topics that came out in 1955. Then we have the Savage Mind, very important. Later it was called as the Wild Thought. The Wild Thought. It came out in 1962. I will make a video on Claude Lévi-Strauss where we will talk about the various terms that he also talked about. So he is very famous because he talked about myths, mythemes. He used the Oedipus Rex story as a myth, and then he structured everything around it. Then he is very famous for the word bricolage as well. We will also discuss that. And he talked about it in this text, right? The Savage Mind came out in 1962. Then in the 1960s, he started to write this masterpiece, this master project. It is a 4-volume study called as Mythologies. So this is why, because of these works, he is very famous. Then we have Roland Barthes. So Roland Barthes took Saussure's theory and developed the concept of binary opposition. So whenever you talk about structuralism, you always have to talk about binary oppositions. And who talked about it? It is Roland Barthes who first talked about it. All social contexts, language, literature, fashion, etc. are self-enclosed system based on differences. This is what he is the first one to talk about. So there are always differences, there are always binaries, whether it is a language world, whether it is literature, whether it is clothing, whether it is fashion, anything. There are always and always binaries. Right? This is what Roland Barthes was saying. For example, good and bad, or good or evil, hot and cold, girl or boy. There are always binary oppositions. A structuralist then must identify binary opposition within the text, show how they interrelate, and thereby decode the world of literature or the work of literature. Unlike deconstruction or the deconstructionists, we have structuralists who believe that this process will allow the critic to unlock the decidable meaning. So, deconstruction के अलग theorists थे, but what were the structuralists saying? They believe that here you can decide the new meaning of the text when you look at the binary oppositions. So, these are the most important works that he has written. The Fashion System in 1967, Writing Degree 0, 1968, Elements of Semiology, 1968, Mythologies, 1972, The Pleasure of the Text, very important, and Says, an essay. This was also asked in the paper recently. In 1975, we have Image, Music and Text, 1977, and Camera Lucinda, Reflections on Photography in 1981. So in the courses that we are going to start from the 1st of Jan, we are going to start a fresh batch. So in the class, we are going to talk about all of these texts in greater detail. But because of the time crunch, I cannot talk about the text per se, but you need to read these texts because all of them are very, very important. Then comes, last but not the least, we have Vladimir Propp. He is also someone who studied myths, right? So Propp built on Levi-Strauss theory, and he described the structuralist approach to narrative called as structuralist narratology. So he brought the structuralism very close to reading of the text, that is called as narratology, right? So this whole new branch came into picture, that is the structuralist narratology. He determined 31 narrative functions of all folk and fairy tales, and he compartmentalized all of these myths into 31 narrative functions. These functions follow the predictable sequence, and there are always predictable sequence according to him. These are the two important works that are written by Propp. So we have Morphology of the Tale, 1928, and Historical Roots of the Wonder Tale, that came out in 1946. So these are the four people you guys have to remember, four critics I must say. We have Fernandez de Saussure, who is very famous, and he talked about Lang and Parole. He talked about concepts like synchronic and diachronic. Then he also talked about various other concepts like the signifier and the signified. So we will be discussing him in greater detail in the next video. Then we have Claude Lévi-Strauss, who talked about myths, very important, and Oedipus Rex ki myth use karke he talked about how the myths can actually see that the structures are created in the whole world, right? So, and his work, The Savage Mind, is the most important work. Then he also said in this work, so in three strophes, he is the one who said that everyone is civilized. There is no one who is barbarian. So it's a very interesting work, and we are going to read more about this person and this text as well in the next video that I will be creating. Then we have Roland Barthes, who can leave and who cannot talk about Roland Barthes in greater detail. So Roland Barthes is definitely someone who has his legs in both the fields, in structuralism as well as in post-structuralism. So gradually he became a post-structuralist, but he started his journey as a structuralist. So he's a very interesting figure, and you have to dwell deeper in the works of Roland Barthes. Last but not the least, we have Vladimir Propp, right? So I hope you understood how you have to read the various theories that are there. If you have any doubt, you can ask me that in the comment section, and I will surely reply to you. Thank you.